On this episode of the show, we're going to be talking about 5 tips for a second peak in your season. Now, this is a question that comes in quite often from our audience. It's something that comes in from our coached athletes, and it's having built up all the way through the winter and aiming for an A race. Often the A race is the summertime or early summertime. What can I do with the rest of my year? What should I do in terms of other events that I've got coming up? Can I do a second Ironman? Can I do a second 70.3? So this episode is going to be all about some different ideas that you can use once you've had that first A race of your season and how you can get your mindset ready for how to approach the rest of the year. So first up, I think the first tip I've got for you is to have a two-part approach to your season every year. The season is really, really long, and your brain will really benefit from having that season broken up into 2 parts. And typically we find with athletes, it's very hard to have more than 2 peaks in a year. It's not to say you can't do more than 2 races in a year, but 2 absolute real peak goal races in each season seems to be about the most athletes can deal with. You can have other races leading up to those A races, but it can really help if you have, say, I don't know, if you were choosing Challenge Roth as your first race of the season in early July. Typically, we've then got an entire blank calendar running all the way through till Christmas. And athletes say to us, well, where do I go from here? What am I going to do? And typically, athletes have been extremely focused. Ironman and 70.3 athletes in particular, the very nature of having to enter that event so far in advance, a year in advance in a lot of cases, means that we're incredibly focused on it. And it can often feel like there's a real void left behind once the A race has happened. So again, the purpose of this is to think about what can we do with the rest of the season. So I think the first thing to accept here, and it's a real bonus for you, is once you've done that first A race of the season, whether it's an Ironman, whether it's a 70.3, but particularly if it's an Ironman, you have incredible fitness. You've trained in a lot of cases for an entire year or more to get to the point of doing the Ironman. Even in the case of a 70.3, you're probably focused on it for 6 months. You're incredibly fit. Oftentimes after a week or 2 of recovery or a week or 2 of downtime, it's not uncommon for athletes to say, I've lost all that fitness. I feel really unfit. And I think largely that's an effect of we just need the break mentally. We take our eye off the ball with the discipline. We've perhaps been very disciplined with nutrition and what we've been eating in the run up to the race. And obviously that's going to relax after the race. And so people can feel very unfit and very out of shape and very undisciplined very quickly. Typically it takes less than 2 weeks to feel that way. So the first thing to remind you is that's not the case. It's mostly in your mind. You have a huge volume of fitness built up in your body and it hasn't gone anywhere. You may not feel very fresh. You may not feel as though you've done very much in the recent past, but all of that volume of fitness is in your body still. And the reason I'm pointing this out to you is to say, you've got the opportunity to use that fitness to go and do lots of fun things, whether that is a second big A race in your season and make it a real focused second peak, or whether it's lots of fun little events along the way. You've got the ability to go and do that. You don't have to do anywhere near the same volume or intensity or mental intensity of training to get yourself ready for this second peak or the second part of the season. You'll be capable of doing things simply because of the volume of training you've built up in your body. So that's the first thing I want to get across to you. The second part of your season, the pressure's off. You've done a ton of work already. It's going to take a lot less training to maintain that fitness than it took to build it in the first place. So I think there's 2 main ways to approach this. Have a second A race, or have a bunch of fun things that you want to do to go and make use of that fitness. So your second A race might be a second Ironman. It might be a second 70.3. It might even be a triathlon of a shorter distance. But you've got the chance to go away and really focus yourself in again after you've had an appropriate break and get ready for that second big peak of the season. The second way to approach this is to have fun with your fitness approach to it. And honestly, it's something that I wish more people would do rather than throw themselves straight back into a second day race. I would love to hear more stories of athletes who say, do you know what? I really focused on an Ironman in the summer and I focused my training on it for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. I just decided to keep myself moving for the rest of the summer, to still swim and bike and run, but to enter as many events as I fancied: sprint events, pool sprints, open water sprints, Olympic distance events, running races, sportives. Even in some cases, we'll talk about ultra runs and marathons a little bit later on. I think they need a bit more of an A race focus. But any of those events that are up to and including the events you've already trained for, you can go and do. You can go and do local 5Ks and 10Ks. You can enter those sportive events that, even in the context of someone who's trained up to 3.5 hours on the bike for 70.3 will be capable of doing a sportive that's much longer, that definitely up to 70 miles, 80 miles, maybe even 100 miles without too much specific preparation, because your body's trained to do a 5 hour, 6 hour, 7 hour event with that 70.3. So give yourself the permission, if you don't want to do a second day race, give yourself a permission to not take these races too seriously, but to go out and do them just for the fun of doing them, and get a load of events under your belt, if you like, to make use of that fitness. Because all too common is the athletes who are really focused on their A race and they might have a B race in the lead up to it. They would really love to do more races along the way, but especially in the case of Ironman athletes, they're really, really focused on the fact they have to do a long ride and a long run each week. And it's really hard to recover from a high intensity shorter race if you're doing that. So if that sounds like that was you earlier in the season, give yourself permission to go out and do some fun things later in the second part of the season. So that's my first tip to you. Have a second peak, but have it either be a whole bunch of fun stuff or have it be an actual real second peak. Now, the second tip I've got is around people who want to do marathons or ultra distance races. It's a really common question I get, and it's usually phrased the opposite way around. It's usually people who are coming to us for coaching who want to do an Ironman in the summer, and they say, I've already entered a marathon in the springtime, so I'll have the marathon in my legs. I won't have to worry about the marathon come race day at the Ironman. And my advice is always drop out of that spring marathon, do a half marathon instead, because we need you focusing on your bike volume and bike fitness during the springtime. It's really, really difficult, especially for first-time Ironmen, to do a marathon effectively in the springtime and still do the effective kind of bike builds that you need to do at that time of year. So my advice is always, and always will be, not to do the spring marathon. However, if you've done a spring or summer Ironman, the autumn time is the perfect time for you to go and do a marathon. For the reasons we've mentioned earlier, you've got a ton of fitness in your body. All of those miles that you did on the bike, and to some extent the swim as well, are also going to count towards the aerobic fitness for the run. You've got a ton of durability in your legs from all the run training you did for your Ironman. Even if you've only, in inverted commas, done a 70.3, you've still got that ton of fitness in your body, and it can form a fantastic springboard for doing a marathon or an ultra marathon during the second half of the year. Now, you can afford then to make that a much more run-focused build. You can drop some of the bikes, you can drop some of the swims, and you can have a much more run focus in there. Now, I personally would still advise our athletes, we still train like triathletes within Team Oxygenaddict. I'm a big believer in using bikes to prepare for a marathon if we do it the effective way. And it can be a great way that you can get additional volume in without overstressing your body with too much running and having to worry about overuse run injuries. But that being said, if you've been itching to go and do a marathon and you're really wondering, I did a pretty good race here in this Ironman and the marathon in that was pretty good. I wonder what I could have done on fresh legs. This is the perfect time for you to do that. September, October marathon means you can have an 8 to 12 week run build through to the marathon and be in really good shape to go and do that. You can even apply the same principles to an ultra marathon. Obviously, the pressure is off you having to do quite as much in terms of bike volume at the time, and keeping some of those bikes in there can really help prepare you for the marathon or ultra marathon as well. So I'm a big, big fan of that forming a part of your second peak of the season if that's what you want to go and do. Now, my third tip for you for the second part of the season is to change your focus. And by that, I mean to change the focus of your training physically and to change the focus of your training mentally. We can't live in a pressure cooker for the entire year. And if you're anything like the athletes that we coach, we have a lot of type A personalities, a lot of people whose, let's be honest, their real strength is their ability to apply themselves to a long term goal and hit the sessions day after day after day. But the drawback of that is it can feel like you're living under that constant pressure cooker, especially if you don't give yourself a little bit of a break at some point. So, a change of focus here can be really good for your longevity in the sport. And you've heard me say, my measure of success as a coach is how many of our athletes are still in the sport in 10 years' time, not in 2 years' time. If we can help athletes make short term, yearly plans for their year that mean they stay fresh year after year after year and stay in the sport rather than burning out, then I think our job's done. So, a change of focus here in your training can be really useful, I think. So, something you can do to change your focus is rather than focusing particularly on a race, you can focus on one of your limiters. If you've really wanted to work on your swim, for example, well, the second part of the season is a great time to get some specific swim coaching, to up the swim volume a little bit, to spend more time swimming in open water, to get some swim video analysis work done, to spend some extra time doing the drill work that'll help move your swim to the next level, for example. You can apply the same principles to your cycling, you can apply the same principles to your running, but you can change that focus away from getting your training plan done to focusing in on something specifically that you want to really, improve on. There's also the element for some athletes. I often, with a small number of athletes, advise them to take a step back a little bit mentally to say, look, you've taken this A race really, really seriously. You put yourself under a ton of pressure. There are a lot of sacrifices made. So the second part of the season is a time you can step back a little bit from giving yourself a really hard time about getting every single session done and just pay attention to other areas of your life. Ramp up the work a little bit more, spend a bit more time with the family, spend the Saturdays taking the kids to football or whatever it is you might have missed out on during some of the time you've been really focused on your training. Take that step back a little bit and take things a little bit less seriously. The flip of that is for some athletes who a race didn't go to plan for whatever reason, it might have been illness, injury, just life getting in the way, it might be a time for the second peak of the season to redouble your efforts and really focus in for a 6 to 10 week period on really building to your second A race of the year and see what you can do if everything goes right for you. But either way, a bit of a change of focus from how things were earlier in the season can pay big dividends for your longevity in the sport. The next tip I've got for you is really important. It's the rest and recovery angle. It's making sure that after you've had a first peak of the season, you do take the time to have enough of a break to make sure you want to get back into training for the next peak. Now, typically, I'll advise athletes to have 2 clear weeks after their A race. After an Ironman, we'll definitely schedule 2 weeks of a recovery period. After a 70.3, physically, I think you only need 1 week of a recovery period. But mentally, do think it's worth making sure that you've had enough of a break from the focused training to feel as though you've stepped out of that self-imposed pressure cooker and feel like you're ready for the next phase of training. So honestly, a minimum of 2 weeks for athletes who've done Ironman, maybe even up to 4 weeks, it's enough to make you feel rested and refreshed. I think your body will recover faster than your mind in a lot of cases. But the Ironman blues have got 2 parts to it. There's the getting over the physical fatigue part, and there's the what am I going to do now this big goal isn't on the horizon. And the rest and recovery can be a really big part of working out where you actually want to go next. And the very last tip I've got for you here is once you've had this second peak of the season, make sure you've planned around enough time to leave a really decent end of season break. So if you're entering September or an October marathon, make sure you plan in the 2 to 4 week break that you're going to need before you apply yourself to the next winter training block. And I think that's really, really important. It would be my first principle. If you're going to succeed next season and have this 10-year plus career in age group triathlon and athletics, we have to plan the seasons in a way that mean you'll be rested and refreshed, ready for the next block of training. So make sure you've left enough time at the end of the year before you jump back into your winter training block. It's particularly important for athletes who are going out to race in Nice or Kona particularly with it being in October, and especially if you're doing a September or October marathon or ultra marathon. Plan in that minimum of 2 weeks and ideally 4 weeks of downtime. You don't have to do nothing during that time, but planning the downtime mentally as much as anything can really help rest and refresh and make sure you're ready for the rest of the upcoming years in your triathlon career. So I hope that gives you some focus. I hope that athletes who've done their first day race of the season are kind of sitting here wondering what next. Hope that's given you some ideas where you can go and given you some focus on how you can structure either a second real A race goal or a second part of your season with lots of fun endurance events that you can go out and really make use of the fitness that you've built over this time. Okay, then. That brings us to the end of this week's episode. So here are some discount codes and deals for you. Over at precisionfuelandhydration.com, use the code OXYGEN24 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. And over at teamoxygenaddict.com, I think we've got the most comprehensive triathlon coaching program for busy age groupers. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today and the advice has helped you out, well, great stuff. I hope that's helped put some of your fears at rest. And I know from some of the calls we've had, it's helping raise the right questions in the minds of people as to whether their current coaching relationship is working for them. If you're looking for a change or if you're looking for high quality proven coaching for Ironman or 70.3 triathlon this year, you can just check out the details of our coaching packages on our website at teamoxygenaddict.com. And then if you're interested, there's a link in the show notes below. You can join our waiting list and you'll be notified if a slot becomes available. And at that point, you'll have a chance to book a call with us and see if you'd be a good fit for joining the team. So although we don't have slots available at the moment, we'll make those call appointments available to people as and when we do have athletes who end their coaching packages during the season, if and when that happens. So remember, there's links in the show notes, so you don't have to remember them. Till next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby, and you've been listening to the Oxygen Addict podcast. See ya.